Thank you so much, and thank you, Alison and Taco, for introducing the topic. Next slide. So the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development has a data information and digital knowledge management section in the implementation plan. And there are three key items that I would like to bring about. One is that there is not a one system or central infrastructure that will be able to implement the vision of the decade. So we all need to work together towards getting data across all the ecosystem to fulfill the mission of the decade. The second one is that we need to embrace a culture of timely, free and open access, use and reuse and redistribution of the observational data for the greatest public good. So we need to work closely with recognized digital repositories. And the last point that I would like to bring is that in order to translate these principles of the framework into outcomes, a working group has been established to develop a strategy of ocean data information stewardship for the decade, IWG. This working group is working with the relevant UN entities to explore a joint data and information system on the decade and investigating the future scope of scientific data information stewardship activities for the decade. And I will introduce this a little bit. As a background, the IOC 30th Assembly established the working group and is managed by the UNESCO IOC IODE program. The vision of the group is to develop a data and information stewardship strategy for the decade. At the onset of this group, we found key challenges that I would like to talk about. The first one, and perhaps the most important one, is that there is a lack of a single universal data policy for international ocean data. While there is an IODE, IOC data policy, this does not really apply to across the ecosystem in the international arena. The fact is that the data reside in many non-interoperable online and offline services at different geographic locations in varying formats and vocabularies and metadata. There are different data governance regimes, which makes it very complex and difficult to acquire and exchange data. In many cases, data users may need to request permission to use the data from a particular data source, depending on the application of the data. And it's really difficult to assess the versioning as well as the quality of the data. Next slide, please. In our first interim report, we recommended using a set of universal data share principles for the decade. These are building on, first, that the data be shared online with minimal delay and restrictions on reuse and adaptation. Two, be released with as complete metadata as possible, including provenance and licensed data through Creative Commons, for example. Be packaged in interoperable forms through compliance with community standards. We talked a lot about the umbrella of how these principles will operate, and they will reinforce the FAIR principles, the findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the CARE, the collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics principles, and the trust, the transparency, responsibility, user-focused, sustainability, and technology principles. These principles also support the data policies of the international initiative, for example, GEO, the IOC, the World Meteorological Organization, and the World Data System. Next slide, please. While the data of the ocean decade is going to be more than oceanographic data, one vehicle that we can use to acquire and assemble and aggregate data is through the World Ocean Database. The World Ocean Database is an IODE project, and it contains over 17 million profiles of oceanographic data that includes all the instrumental record. Most of the data come from international sources, and very little comes from the United States, for example. About 90% of the data come from international sources, pinging the importance of the international collaboration. Next slide, please. Let me end up with the important aspect that I would like to bring, that the value of data is realized when its use results in relevant information and policy making. Our group, the IWG saw this, released the first interim report in June 2020. Here's the link. And our next step is to develop a comprehensive data management plan. We would like to invite everybody in the group to join our effort as part of the open membership. And I would like to end up there. Thank you so much for the opportunity.